My name is Nia, and I am 28 years old. On the day I officially earned my medical degree, my parents handed me a thin envelope containing exactly $800 and told me my grandmother had sent it as a gift. Less than 48 hours later, my grandmother looked me dead in the eye and asked how much the $80,000 she wired had helped with my massive student loans. When I told her I only received $800, the temperature in the room dropped to absolute zero, and the foundation of my entire family completely shattered. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who viewed your hard work as their personal piggy bank. The evening began at a dimly lit, absurdly expensive steakhouse in downtown Atlanta, a place where the waiters wore white gloves, and the chandeliers looked like they cost more than my entire first year of medical school tuition. I was sitting at a massive mahogany table, my hands trembling so violently beneath the pristine white tablecloth that I had to interlock my fingers just to keep them still. I had literally just walked out of a brutal 36-hour shift at the pediatric emergency room. My body was completely depleted, running on nothing but stale break room coffee, adrenaline, and a half-eaten cold turkey sandwich I had managed to choke down while updating patient charts at 4 in the morning. My scrubs were safely tucked away in my beat-up sedan outside, replaced by a simple conservative navy blue dress I had bought on clearance 2 years ago. I felt physically hollowed out. Every muscle in my back screamed in agony, and the bright lights of the restaurant felt like needles piercing behind my eyes. Getting through medical school and my residency matches had been a grueling solitary war. I had financed my entire education through crippling student loans, skipped meals to buy medical textbooks, and even sold my own blood plasma during my second year just to keep the lights on in my cramped windowless studio apartment. Yet as I sat there at the head of the table, supposed to be the guest of honor, celebrating my transition from medical student to actual doctor, I was completely invisible. Across from me sat my mother Valerie and my father Desmond. They were dressed in flashy designer outfits that screamed for attention, a stark contrast to the quiet elegance of the restaurant. They ran a failing event catering business that was constantly teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, yet they insisted on projecting the image of wealthy, successful entrepreneurs to our entire church congregation. To my right sat my older sister, Keisha. Keisha was 31, undeniably beautiful, and fully weaponized that beauty to get through life without ever holding down a real job. She called herself a lifestyle influencer and a serial entrepreneur, which essentially meant she took selfies in expensive restaurants and demanded that the rest of the family fund her delusions. Next to her was her husband, Terrence. Terrence was 34 and carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a man who constantly claimed he was one deal away from becoming a millionaire. He was a fast-talking crypto investor who rented luxury cars for the weekend just to post them on his social media accounts, projecting a fake lifestyle while dodging calls from bill collectors. He was currently swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, leaning back in his chair, and talking loudly about some new digital currency token that was going to disrupt the banking industry. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to focus on my plate of roasted asparagus and seared ribeye. I just wanted to eat my meal, go home, and sleep for 2 entire days. But my mother Valerie had other plans. She picked up her crystal wine glass and tapped it loudly with a silver spoon, demanding the attention of not just our table, but the tables nearby. The restaurant quieted down slightly. "I want to propose a toast," my mother announced, her voice booming with that specific theatrical tone she used when testifying at Sunday church service. She stood up, smoothing down her designer dress, making sure every eye in the room was on her. "We are gathered here today to celebrate success. It takes a village, and the Washington family has always been about elevating excellence." For a brief, naive second, I thought she was actually going to acknowledge the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into my medical degree. I thought she might mention the countless nights I cried from exhaustion, or the fact that I was the first person in our family history to become a doctor. Instead, she pivoted flawlessly. "I want everyone to raise a glass to my brilliant eldest daughter, Keisha." My mother continued, her smile widening as she gestured across the table. Keisha just secured the most gorgeous new Chanel handbag to celebrate her upcoming business launch. And let us not forget Terrence, who is on the verge of closing a massive investment portfolio that will secure generational wealth for this family. The Lord is truly blessing their entrepreneurial spirits. They are taking this family to the next level. I sat there, frozen, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. My mother spent the next 10 minutes delivering a glowing, passionate monologue about Keisha and Terrence and their fake wealth. She praised their vision, their style, and their supposed dedication to uplifting the family name. Not once did she mention my degree. Not once did she use the word doctor. I was the one who had spent 5 years drowning in books and saving lives in the emergency room, but in my parents' eyes, I was just the background character in Keisha and her glamorous production. When she finally finished her speech, my mother sat back down to a round of enthusiastic applause from my father and Terrence. Keisha blew air kisses across the table, looking incredibly pleased with herself. I continued eating in silence, pushing my food around the plate, trying to swallow the familiar bitter taste of being entirely overlooked. This was the black tax in its purest, most toxic form. My hard work was expected, demanded, and ignored, while my sister and her flashy incompetence was celebrated and funded. Just as the waiter came to clear our plates, my mother reached into her oversized designer purse. She pulled out a thin, standard white bank envelope and tossed it unceremoniously across the table. It landed next to my water glass. "Oh, before I forget," my mother said, her tone suddenly shifting from celebratory to casually dismissive. "Your grandmother Ruby could not make the flight from Atlanta to be here tonight. You know how her arthritis gets when she travels. But she wired a little something to my account for your graduation. I took the cash out for you." I looked at the envelope. It was painfully thin. I picked it up with my tired, aching hands and opened the flap. Inside were 8 crisp $100 bills. $800. "It is $800, my mother stated, taking a sip of her wine and looking at me with a critical, appraising glare. "Now listen to me carefully, Nia. I expect you to bring $80 of that to service this Sunday for your tithe. You need to sow a seed into the church to thank the Lord for letting you pass your medical exams. As for the rest of it, I strongly suggest you go to a decent department store and buy yourself some respectable clothes. You are supposed to be a doctor now. You need to stop walking around looking like a homeless person. It is embarrassing for the family image." The absolute audacity of her words felt like a physical slap to the face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up, flip the table, and demand to know why my sister and her fake luxury life was praised, while my grueling life-saving profession was treated as an embarrassment because I did not wear Gucci. But I bit my tongue. I took a deep breath, forced a polite, deadpan smile, and slipped the thin envelope into my purse. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm and hollow. "I will be sure to thank Grandma Ruby for the $800. "Good," my mother snapped, adjusting her diamond earrings. "Now let us order dessert. Terrence, tell us more about that luxury car rental business you are planning to launch." The dinner dragged on, agonizing and exceptionally loud. I stared outside. A sleek black car approached the valet stand. The rear door swung open, and I immediately recognized the distinguished silver-haired woman stepping out into the night. The maitre d' opened the heavy oak doors of our private dining room, and the entire table fell into a sudden, suffocating silence. Grandma Ruby stepped into the room. She was 78 years old, but carried herself with the undeniable authority of a matriarch who had built a real estate empire from the ground up during the harshest eras of Atlanta history. She wore a tailored emerald green suit, her silver hair immaculately coiffed, and her posture completely unyielding. She did not look like an old woman suffering from arthritis, unable to travel, as my mother had so confidently claimed just 10 minutes ago. She looked like a judge arriving to deliver a verdict. My mother dropped her wine glass. The crystal shattered against the edge of the table, spilling expensive red wine across the white linen, but no one moved to clean it up. My father Desmond turned a sickly shade of ashen gray, his confident posture instantly collapsing. Keisha and Terrence abruptly stopped their loud chatter about crypto investments, shrinking back into their leather chairs as if trying to blend into the wallpaper. The sheer panic radiating from my parents was palpable. Grandma Ruby did not even glance at them. She walked straight past my mother, ignoring her entirely, and made a beeline for my end of the table. Her sharp, dark eyes were locked solely on me. When she reached my chair, I stood up, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a fierce, protective embrace. I could feel the silk of her suit and smell her familiar lavender perfume. It was the first genuine display of affection I had received all day long. "My beautiful, brilliant girl, Grandma Ruby," said her voice rich and steady, echoing clearly in the dead silent room. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Dr. Washington. You did it. You fought through the sleepless nights, the endless exams, the sheer exhaustion, and you conquered it all. You are a doctor. You broke the ceiling." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. Hearing my actual title spoken aloud by someone who truly meant it cracked the heavy armor I had been wearing all evening. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, hugging her back tightly. "I really missed you today. Mom said you were too sick to fly." Grandma Ruby pulled back slightly, keeping her hands firmly on my shoulders. She shot a single razor-sharp look toward my mother, whose face was now slick with nervous sweat. Sick, Grandma Ruby let out a short, dry laugh. "I have never been healthier. I just decided to skip the theatrical pageant your parents call a dinner and take an earlier flight so I could celebrate my favorite physician in person." She smiled at me, her eyes crinkling with warmth, her hands gently squeezed my arms. "Baby girl, I know the financial burden of medical school has been crushing you. I know you have been living on ramen and selling your plasma just to buy textbooks. But that is over now. Tell me, did that $80,000 I wired last week wipe out your highest interest student loans? I want you starting your pediatric residency with a clean slate and total peace of mind." The restaurant ambient music seemed to fade into a complete absolute vacuum. The clinking of silverware from the main dining room felt a million miles away. My brain struggled to process the numbers she just spoke. $80,000. Not $800. 80,000? I reached into my purse, pulling out the thin white bank envelope my mother had tossed at me earlier. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled loudly. I opened it and pulled out the 8 crisp $100 bills. "Grandma?" I said, my voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "I only got $800. Mom said this was exactly what you sent." The air in the room was instantly sucked out. Grandma Ruby slowly turned her head, shifting her gaze from the $800 in my trembling hands to my parents, sitting frozen at the other end of the table. Absolute chaos erupted. My father Desmond jumped up from his chair, waving his hands defensively, knocking over his water goblet in the process. "Mom, wait. Let me explain." Desmond stammered, his voice pitching higher than normal. "The bank put a sudden security hold on large transfers. You know how these financial institutions treat us. They flagged the $80,000 wire because it was unusually large. We had to route it through our joint business account just to clear the security protocols." My mother Valerie immediately jumped in to back up his desperate lie, switching to her most aggressive gaslighting tactics. "Exactly," Valerie chimed in, her voice shrill and defensive. "And honestly, Mother, we wanted to manage the funds for her anyway. Nia is young. She is just a student who does not understand money. We were worried she would blow it on something irresponsible. We gave her the $800 as a starter allowance, just to see how she budgets." I stared at them, my vision blurring with a mixture of absolute rage and profound betrayal. They were looking me right in the eye and calling me irresponsible. I was a 28-year-old medical doctor who had survived on a shoestring budget for half a decade without ever asking them for a single dime. Yet my sister Keisha, who had never paid her own rent a day in her life, was sitting right next to them, dripping in designer brands funded by my parents. Terrence, trying to play the smooth mediator, leaned forward and adjusted his luxury watch. "Grandma Ruby, do not stress yourself out over this. The family finances are being strategically diversified." We are just keeping the wealth circulating within the family ecosystem where it can generate real returns for everyone. You know how we operate. Black families have to stick together and share the blessings. We are just looking out for Nia and her future portfolio. The sheer audacity of Terrence trying to frame their blatant theft as a financial strategy made my blood boil. They had hijacked $80,000 meant to free me from crushing debt. That money was my escape route from the suffocating financial anxiety that kept me awake every single night. It was my absolute freedom. And they had taken it, viewing my hard-earned milestone as nothing more than an opportunity to line their own pockets and feed their own bottomless greed and ridiculous vanity. I looked at my mother, expecting even a fraction of remorse, but Valerie merely adjusted her diamond necklace, completely unbothered by the devastation painted across my face. She honestly believed she was entitled to the money I needed to survive. She believed her fake catering business and Keisha's endless shopping sprees took priority over the suffocating mountain of medical school debt hanging over my neck. They expected me to simply swallow this betrayal, to smile for the church congregation on Sunday, and pretend we were the perfect Black family while they robbed me blind. They wanted a golden goose they could pluck bare without a single thought about whether I would freeze to death in the process. The sheer entitlement made my stomach churn violently. Every sacrifice I had made over the past 5 years meant absolutely nothing to them. Grandma Ruby did not scream. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw a drink or create a dramatic scene for the restaurant patrons to witness. She simply gave my parents and Terrence a dead-eyed, emotionless stare that was far more terrifying than any loud outburst could ever be. She looked at them the way one looks at a parasite. "A security hold," Grandma Ruby said, her voice dangerously low, cutting through their pathetic excuses like a scalpel. "You think I built a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio by being stupid, Desmond? You think my private wealth manager does not send me a direct confirmation when a wire hits the exact destination account? I know exactly where that money went." Valerie opened her mouth to argue, but Ruby raised one single manicured finger, silencing her instantly. "Do not speak, Valerie. Do not say another word. Every syllable out of your mouth is a liability." Grandma Ruby turned her back on them, completely dismissing their existence. She looked at me, her expression softening back into fierce, protective love. She reached out and gently took the $800 from my shaking hands, placing the bills back into the envelope. She grabbed my purse from the back of the chair and handed it to me. "Come to my hotel suite," Grandma Ruby commanded, her tone leaving zero room for negotiation. Now. I did not look back. I did not say goodbye to my mother or my father. I did not acknowledge Keisha or her scam artist husband. I walked out of that private dining room, turning my back on the family that had just proven they would gladly devour my future to feed their own insatiable greed. As the heavy oak doors closed behind us, I realized the bitter truth. My family had stolen my future. This meant war. I was ready. The ride to the Four Seasons was a blur of neon streetlights and suffocating silence. I sat in the back of the black town car, staring at my hands. These same hands had stitched lacerations and held premature infants. My family did not see a healer. They saw a bank. Grandma Ruby sat beside me, completely composed. She did not offer empty platitudes. She knew the time for comfort had passed. When we reached her penthouse suite, the sheer scale of her actual wealth became apparent. The room was expansive, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, but I had no energy to admire the architecture. I dropped my cheap purse onto a marble table and sank into a velvet armchair. My chest heaved as I fought the urge to hyperventilate. Grandma Ruby did not offer me a glass of water. She walked straight to the massive oak desk in the corner, picked up her phone and dialed. "Put your feelings in a box for 5 minutes, Nia," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger at me. "We need facts before we formulate a battle plan." She pressed the speaker button and set the phone on the glass coffee table between us. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Good evening, Mrs. Hayes. It is Marcus. How can I assist you tonight?" "Marcus." I need you to pull the wire transfer logs for the $80,000 transaction I authorized last Tuesday to Desmond and Valerie Washington. I need the exact routing history and the subsequent dispersal of funds from their joint account. Do not tell me about bank holds. Tell me exactly where my money went. There was a brief pause. I held my breath. The silence stretched wrapping around my throat like a vice. Then Marcus cleared his throat. I have the logs pulled up, Mrs. Hayes. The $80,000 successfully cleared their joint account on Wednesday morning at 9:15. There was no security hold. My stomach plummeted. They had the money for days. They looked at my exhausted face all week, knowing they had my salvation sitting in their bank account. Marcus continued, his voice entirely clinical and devoid of emotion. Within 20 minutes of the wire clearing, the funds were immediately dispersed into two separate transactions. The first transfer was for exactly $30,000. It was routed directly to an American Express Platinum credit card registered to Valerie Washington. The payment cleared a maxed-out balance. I closed my eyes. The Chanel bag, the designer outfits, the elaborate catering displays for their failing business. My mother had stolen the money intended to free me from a lifetime of debt, just so she could parade around the church sanctuary on Sunday mornings, pretending she was a successful socialite. She bought her fake luxury aesthetic with my blood and sweat. And the remaining $50,000, Marcus asked Grandma Ruby, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. The remaining $50,000 was wired at 9:45 that same morning to a corporate account registered under the name Apex Vanguard Holdings, LLC. The sole proprietor listed on the corporate registry is Terrence Miller. The room spun. Terrence. My parents had stolen $50,000 of my money to fund my sister's fraudulent husband. They gave my financial freedom to a man who scammed people for a living just so Keisha could maintain her illusion of being married to a wealthy entrepreneur. Thank you, Marcus, Grandma Ruby said. Email me the official documentation right away. Have a good night. She ended the call. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. The reality of the theft settled over me like a heavy lead blanket, crushing the air out of my lungs. They did not just take my money. They took my dignity. They took the endless, grueling hours I had sacrificed. A sharp, ragged sob ripped out of my throat. I doubled over, burying my face in my hands. All the exhaustion I had been suppressing for 5 years suddenly crashed down on me. I remembered sitting in the medical library until 3 in the morning, rationing a single package of instant noodles because my bank account was overdrawn by $12. I looked up at Grandma Ruby, tears streaming down my face, blurring my vision. I sold my blood plasma. Grandma, I choked out, my voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal. I literally sat in a clinic with a needle in my arm twice a week, watching my blood get pumped into a machine, just so I could afford the registration fees for my medical board exams. I was so dizzy and malnourished some days, I had to lean against the hospital walls just to stay upright during my clinical rotations. I sacrificed my health. I sacrificed my youth. I pointed a shaking hand toward the window toward the city where my family was currently drinking expensive wine, and they stole it. Mom used my blood money to pay off a credit card she maxed out, buying designer purses to impress her church friends. Dad handed $50,000 to a con artist so Keisha could pretend she married a boss. They let me starve. They watched me suffer, and they let me starve. I could not stop crying. The betrayal was a physical agony tearing through my chest. I had spent my entire life trying to make them proud. I took on the crushing weight of the black tax, believing that if I just worked hard enough, they would finally see my value. Instead, they saw me as collateral damage, a stepping stone for their own shallow vanity. Grandma Ruby walked over and stood directly in front of me. She did not pat my back. She did not offer me a tissue. She reached out and grabbed my chin, lifting my head, forcing me to look directly into her fierce, unwavering eyes. "Tears will not get your money back, Nia," she said, her voice sharp and commanding, ringing with the authority of a woman who had survived far worse. Crying over people who do not have a conscience is a waste of your valuable hydration. They showed you exactly who they are tonight. They are parasites. And what do we do with parasites? We eradicate them. I sniffled, wiping my face with the back of my hand. Her intense gaze anchored me, pulling me out of my emotional spiral. You are a medical doctor. Grandma Ruby continued, her grip on my chin, firm and grounding. You diagnose the disease and you cut it out. Desmond and Valerie are banking on the fact that you are a good, obedient daughter. They think you will just swallow this theft to keep the peace. They think you are too weak to fight back because they spent your entire life programming you to accept their abuse. She released my chin and walked back to the desk, picking up a sleek leather-bound folder. She tossed it onto the coffee table right in front of me. I am transferring another $80,000 into an account solely in your name by tomorrow morning, she stated, crossing her arms. Your student loans will be paid off. Your financial future is secure. But I am not doing it so you can forgive and forget. I am doing it so you can fight them without worrying about your survival. We are going to destroy their little house of cards. We are going to take back every single ounce of dignity they stripped from you. Strategy will win this war, Nia, not tears. I stared at the leather folder, then up at the strong, unyielding woman who had just given me my life back. The tears stopped completely. The crushing weight of the betrayal morphed into something entirely different. It hardened into a cold, calculated fury. My spine straightened, and the exhaustion that had been plaguing me evaporated. What is the first step? I asked, my voice steady and devoid of all previous warmth. Grandma Ruby smiled, a dangerous, calculating smirk that sent a shiver down my spine. The first step is making them believe they won. You have to play their game. You have to go back into the lion den and act like the broken, submissive daughter they expect you to be. Give them enough rope and they will hang themselves. I nodded, picking up my purse. Get some sleep, Grandma, I said, turning toward the door. I have an appointment to keep. I walked out of the penthouse suite and took the elevator down to the parking garage. The warm, humid night air hit me hard as I unlocked my beat-up sedan. I slid into the driver's seat, gripped the steering wheel tight, and started the heavy engine. I drove straight to my parents' house at exactly 2 a.m, ready for a confrontation that would set the stage for their absolute destruction. The tires of my sedan screeched against the concrete as I pulled into my parents' driveway. The house was a sprawling brick colonial, an absurdly expensive rental they leased to project a fake lifestyle to their church friends. Every window on the first floor was blazing with light. It was 2 a.m, but the perpetrators were wide awake. I slammed my car door shut and marched up the brick pathway. I did not bother reaching for my keys. I lifted my foot and kicked the heavy wooden front door hard enough to rattle the hinges. It burst open, hitting the entryway wall with a deafening crack that echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. I stepped inside the foyer, breathing heavily, my fists clenched at my sides. My father Desmond and my mother Valerie were standing in the center of the living room. They had been whispering frantically together. Their heads snapped toward me, their faces drained of color. The crystal glasses they were holding trembled in their hands. They looked like two cornered animals caught right in the middle of calculating their next manipulation. I did not give them a single second to formulate a new lie. "Where is my money?" I demanded, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. "Give me back my $80,000 right now." My father immediately stepped forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Nia, you need to lower your voice," he commanded, his tone dripping with false authority. "You cannot come barging into our house in the middle of the night acting like a wild animal. The neighbors will hear you." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that lacked any real humor. "You think I care about your fake reputation with the neighbors today, you thieves?" I stepped closer to them, completely ignoring his command. "You stole my financial freedom to pay off a credit card and fund a scam artist. I want my money back." Valerie slammed her glass down onto the coffee table. Her initial panic vanished entirely, replaced by a vicious, toxic indignation. She marched up to me, jabbing her manicured finger into my chest. How dare you speak to us like that? She screamed, her eyes wide with unhinged rage. We raised you, we fed you and clothed you for 18 years. You are going to be a rich doctor making 6 figures while your sister is struggling to build her empire. How selfish can you be to hoard money from your own blood? Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to flinch. I stared right back into her furious eyes, refusing to back down ever again tonight. Selfish, I spat the word, tasting like venom on my tongue. I sold my own blood plasma to pay for medical textbooks while you bought designer bags. I starved in a windowless apartment while you paraded around the church bragging about your wealth. And you call me selfish because I want the money that my grandmother sent specifically to me. Valerie crossed her arms, letting out a loud, mocking scoff. Your grandmother has no idea how the real world works, Valerie sneered. She is an old woman who does not understand the complexities of generational wealth. Black families have to stick together, Nia. When one of us rises, we all rise. You have an obligation to pull your family up with you. That money was a blessing from God for this entire household. You are acting like a greedy, ungrateful child who wants to keep all the blessings for herself. It is not a blessing when you have to steal it, I fired back, stepping into her personal space. That is a crime. It is fraud. And stealing from your own child is the lowest, most disgusting thing a mother could ever do. Desmond moved between us, puffing out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. You better watch your mouth, little girl. Desmond growled, his voice turning nasty. You owe us. Do you hear me? You owe us for housing you as a teenager. You owe us for feeding you when you were growing up. We provided a roof over your head and kept you safe. That $80,000 is merely a small repayment for the sacrifices we made to keep you alive. You are paying your dues. Every successful Black professional has to pay their dues to the family that built them today. I stared at the man who was supposed to be my protector, feeling absolutely nothing but cold disgust. Raising a child is a legal and moral obligation, Desmond. It is not a financial loan with compounding interest. You do not get to send me a bill for keeping me alive when I was a minor. I did not ask to be born into this family. You chose to have me, and you definitely do not get to steal my future to fund Terrence and his ridiculous crypto scams. The mention of Terrence made Valerie lose her mind completely. She lunged forward, her face contorted in absolute fury. Do not you dare disrespect your brother-in-law! Valerie shrieked, spit flying from her lips. Terrence is an entrepreneur. He is trying to build a legacy for your sister. He needed capital to start his new venture, and banks discriminate against us. They do not give Black men loans easily. We had to do what was necessary to secure his future. You are a doctor, Nia. You have guaranteed income for the rest of your life. You have a safety net. Keisha does not have that luxury. We redistributed the funds to ensure both of our daughters have a solid foundation. It is called equity. You are just too blinded by your own selfish pride to see the bigger picture. I was completely suffocated by the sheer magnitude of their delusion. They had twisted their theft into a twisted narrative of racial struggle and family equity. They weaponized the Black tax to justify robbing me blind. They truly believed that my grueling success meant I was no longer entitled to basic respect or my own property. I was nothing more than a human ATM designed to fund their endless, reckless financial failures. I am not a bank, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that made both of them pause. And I am definitely not funding Keisha and her useless husband. You are going to return every single cent of that $80,000. If you do not wire it back to me by tomorrow morning, I am going straight to the police. I will report the theft. I will press charges. I will testify against both of you in court. And I will gladly watch you go to prison for wire fraud. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For a brief second, I saw genuine fear flash across my father's face. He knew I was not bluffing. He knew I had the documentation, the wire logs, and the backing of Grandma Ruby. He swallowed hard, taking a slow, cautious step backward away from me immediately. But my mother did not back down. Valerie threw her head back and let out a loud, manic laugh that sent chills down my spine. You are going to call the police on your own parents, Valerie mocked, shaking her head. You are going to drag our family name through the mud and destroy our reputation in the church. Go ahead, Nia. Call them. See what happens when a successful black doctor tries to send her hardworking parents to prison over a family dispute. The community will turn their backs on you. You will be branded a traitor, a disgrace to your own blood. They will spit on your name. I looked at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. I do not care about your church friends, Valerie. I do not care about your fake reputation. I only care about my money, and I am getting it back today, right now. I took my phone out of my pocket, ready to dial the authorities right then and there to prove my point. The tension in the room reached a boiling point, a volatile powder keg ready to explode into violence. Desmond clenched his fists, looking around frantically for a way to stop me. Valerie stood her ground, her eyes blazing with toxic defiance, challenging me to cross the point of no return. I unlocked my screen, my thumb hovering directly over the keypad. The battle lines were permanently drawn, and I was fully prepared to initiate the ultimate destruction of my parents' lives. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. They had made their bed, and now they were going to sleep in a federal prison cell. But before my thumb could press the first digit, Keisha stepped out from the dark hallway holding her phone with a smug smile. I froze, my thumb hovering over the bright screen as my older sister glided into the living room. Keisha was wearing a designer silk robe, her hair wrapped perfectly in a matching scarf, looking completely unbothered by the screaming match that had just taken place. She tapped her manicured nails against the screen of her phone, her smug smile widening into a predatory grin. "You are not going to call the police, Nia?" she stated, her voice dripping with absolute arrogance. "You are not going to call a lawyer, and you are certainly not going to press charges against our parents. You are going to put your little phone away, walk out the front door, and go back to your miserable, exhausting life. Because if you make one single move against this family, I will personally make sure you never practice medicine again in your entire life." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of her threat. "You have absolutely nothing on me, Keisha." I fired back, my voice steady, despite the rapid beating of my heart. "I have worked my entire life to keep my record spotless. I have stellar evaluations from my attending physicians and top scores on my medical board exams. There is literally nothing you can do to jeopardize my medical license or my pediatric residency. You are just making empty threats to protect your stolen money and your scam artist husband. Do not test me tonight. I will send you all to prison." Keisha let out a high-pitched mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the rented colonial house. "Oh, Nia, you always were book smart but completely street stupid. Did you really think you could keep secrets from me?" She unlocked her phone and began scrolling dramatically. "You forgot that we still share the same family cellular data plan. I can see your data usage. I can see the numbers you dial. And more importantly, I saw the mail you carelessly left on the kitchen counter when you visited for Thanksgiving last year. The billing statements from that high-end psychiatric clinic downtown. The ones treating you for severe clinical anxiety and chronic panic attacks. The air was violently sucked right out of my lungs. My entire body went rigid. During my second year of medical school, the relentless pressure, the staggering debt, and the toxic isolation had finally broken me. I had suffered a series of debilitating panic attacks that left me hyperventilating in hospital supply closets. Recognizing that I needed professional help to survive the grueling 80-hour work weeks, I had sought out therapy. I had quietly found a licensed therapist who specialized in physician burnout. I had paid out of pocket to keep it completely off my medical insurance records, terrified of the stigma surrounding mental health in the medical field. It was my deepest, most guarded secret. My mother Valerie suddenly stood up taller, her eyes gleaming with renewed malicious energy. She realized instantly that Keisha had just handed her the ultimate weapon. "You went to a mental institution?" Valerie gasped, feigning absolute horror, while a cruel, victorious smile played on her lips. "You have been hiding a severe psychiatric condition while treating innocent, sick children. Good Lord, Nia, that is incredibly reckless and dangerous. What kind of doctor hides a mental breakdown from her employers? You are a massive liability to that hospital." Desmond crossed his arms, puffing his chest out again, completely emboldened by my sudden quiet silence. "I knew you were unstable," Desmond sneered, shaking his head in mock disappointment. Only a crazy person would come barging into their parents' house at 2 in the morning, making wild accusations about stolen money. Keisha stepped right up to my face, her phone held tightly in her hand, like a loaded gun. "Let us play out this little scenario, Nia," she whispered, her tone lethal and precise. "You call the police and report the $80,000. The moment you do, I will personally call your residency program director. I will call the state medical board. I will send them copies of your psychiatric billing statements. I will tell them you are completely mentally unstable, prone to violent manic episodes, and pose an immediate danger to your pediatric patients. I will tell them you are having a severe psychotic break and making up paranoid delusional lies tonight." Who do you think they will believe, Nia? A loving, concerned family, or an overworked, exhausted resident with a documented history of severe psychiatric distress? The sheer evil of her blackmail paralyzed me. The state medical board takes any allegation of physician impairment incredibly seriously. Even a baseless accusation from a family member could trigger a massive, grueling, mandatory investigation. I would be immediately suspended from my pediatric residency pending a full psychiatric evaluation. My reputation in the hospital would be permanently destroyed. The attending physicians who had mentored me would look at me with heavy suspicion. The grueling 5 years of starvation, poverty, and relentless studying would be flushed down the drain in a matter of hours. Keisha was not just threatening to keep my money, she was threatening to annihilate my entire identity. She was willing to burn my life to the ground without any hesitation. I looked at my mother, expecting at least a fraction of maternal instinct to kick in. Surely she would draw the line at actively destroying her own daughter's career. But Valerie simply stood there, nodding in complete agreement with Keisha. "You leave us no choice, Nia," Valerie said, her voice sickeningly sweet and rational. "We have to protect this family. We have to protect your brother-in-law and his business ventures. If you force our hand, we will do whatever it takes to neutralize the threat. Go home, Nia. Go sleep off this manic episode. Tomorrow you will realize that sharing your blessings with your sister was the right thing to do. If you behave yourself, we will keep your little mental health secret safely hidden away." I looked at my father, expecting him to finally intervene. Desmond looked away, refusing to meet my eyes directly. His silence was total complicity. He was perfectly fine with his golden child destroying my medical license as long as he did not have to return the stolen cash. I was standing in a room full of monsters. These were not my parents. This was not my sister. These were relentless, soulless predators who had identified my only vulnerability and jammed a knife directly into it. They did not care if I ended up homeless. They did not care if my career was destroyed. They only cared about their designer clothes, their fake church reputation, and funding the illusion of their wealth. The cold, calculated fury that Grandma Ruby had ignited in my chest earlier that night crystallized into absolute ice. Crying over people who do not have a conscience is a waste of your valuable hydration. Grandma Ruby was right. I could not fight these predators with anger today. I could not fight them with emotional outbursts. They thrived on chaos and manipulation. To defeat them, I had to become smarter, colder, and utterly ruthless. I had to outplay them at their own miserable game. I slowly lowered my phone, locking the screen and slipping it back into my coat pocket. I forced my facial muscles to relax, letting my shoulders slump forward perfectly, mimicking the posture of a defeated, broken woman. "You win," I whispered, staring at the hardwood floor, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound authentic. "I will not call the police. Please, Keisha, do not call the medical board. Do not call my residency director. I worked too hard for my license. Please just keep my secret. I will let the money go. I am sorry I came over here and yelled at you. I was just stressed and panicking today." Keisha smiled triumphantly, a look of pure, euphoric victory washing over her face. She practically vibrated with the thrill of having successfully dominated me. I knew you would see reason. Nia Keisha purred, patting me condescendingly on the shoulder. You always were a smart girl when you finally calmed down. Just focus on your little hospital shifts and leave the family finances to the adults. Valerie let out a loud dramatic sigh of relief, pressing a hand to her chest. Praise the Lord, she exclaimed, looking up at the ceiling. The devil tried to sow division in this house tonight, but love and family loyalty prevailed. Desmond finally relaxed his tense posture, nodding approvingly. Go home and get some rest, Naya, he ordered. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes downcast, playing the role of the subdued scapegoat. I turned around and walked out the front door. I sat in my car, locking the doors. I pulled out my phone and made a cold, calculated call to Grandma Ruby to initiate the trap. The ringing tone buzzed softly against my ear as I stared through my windshield at the darkened street. Grandma Ruby answered on the first ring. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I recounted every single detail of the confrontation. I told her about the medical board threat, the stolen psychiatric records, and the sheer viciousness in my sister's eyes. I expected Grandma Ruby to express shock or outrage. Instead, a dark, low chuckle echoed through the phone speaker. They handed you the master key to their destruction, she said, her voice completely devoid of panic. Blackmail is a desperate move, Naya. It means they know they have no actual power. Now we know exactly what game we are playing. She instructed me to disappear for exactly 3 days. No texts, no calls, no social media updates. I was to let them sit in the anxious silence, wondering if their threat had actually worked, or if I was quietly building a legal case. Then after 72 hours, I was to walk right back into their house and give them the performance of a lifetime. You have to feed their egos until they choke on them, Grandma Ruby advised, her tone razor sharp. Narcissists cannot resist submission. If you play the broken daughter, they will completely lower their defenses. They will think they broke your spirit, and when a predator thinks its prey is dead, it stops watching its back. I agreed to the plan. I hung up the phone, put my car into drive, and pulled away from the curb. The fire in my chest had burned down to a concentrated white-hot coal. For 3 agonizing days, I went completely dark. I attended my hospital shifts with laser focus, ignoring the barrage of anxious text messages that eventually started flooding in from my mother. She sent vague, passive-aggressive quotes about family loyalty and Bible verses about forgiveness, clearly testing the waters to see if I was preparing to retaliate. I did not respond. I let the silence stretch until it became a suffocating presence in their rented colonial house. When Sunday afternoon finally arrived, I prepared myself for the hardest acting job of my entire life. I purposely wore a faded oversized sweater and plain jeans. I tied my hair back into a messy bun and skipped wearing any makeup, ensuring the dark circles under my eyes from my hospital shifts were prominently displayed. I needed to look utterly defeated. I needed to look like a woman whose spirit had been entirely crushed under the weight of her family's dominance. I drove to their house and parked in the driveway, taking one last deep breath to center myself. I walked up to the heavy wooden door and knocked softly. Keisha answered. She was wearing a pristine white designer jumpsuit, holding a glass of champagne. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second when she saw my haggard appearance before morphing into a look of absolute smug satisfaction. Look who finally decided to come out of hiding, Keisha sneered, leaning against the doorframe blocking my path. Have you come to throw another psychotic tantrum, or did you actually bring some manners this time? I forced my shoulders to slump forward, keeping my eyes trained firmly on the porch floorboards. I came to apologize. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, pitching it to sound raw and trembling. Please, Keisha, just let me talk to Mom and Dad. I need to make things right. Keisha smiled, a wide, predatory grin that made my stomach churn with disgust. She stepped aside, waving me into the foyer with a theatrical sweep of her hand. I walked into the living room. My mother Valerie and my father Desmond were lounging on the expensive leather sofas. Terrence was sitting in an armchair scrolling through his phone. The moment I entered, all conversation ceased. They looked at me with cold, assessing glares, waiting to see if I was a threat or a defeated victim. I walked to the center of the room and let my knees buckle slightly, sinking down onto the edge of the coffee table. I brought my hands to my face, forcing hot tears to prick my eyes. It was not hard to cry. I just thought about the sheer injustice of my entire existence in this family. I am so sorry, I sobbed, letting my voice crack with manufactured shame. I was so wrong. I was arrogant and blinded by my own pride. I sat in my apartment for 3 days, thinking about everything you said to me. You were right. You were completely right. Valerie sat up straighter, setting her wine glass down. Her eyes gleamed with the intoxicating thrill of victory. Go on, Nia, she commanded, her voice dripping with artificial maternal patience. Tell us what you realized. I wiped a tear from my cheek, looking up at her with wide, pleading eyes. I realized how selfish I have been. I cried, forcing my voice to shake. I have been so focused on my medical degree and my student loans that I completely forgot the sacrifices you made to get me here. You raised me. You put a roof over my head. I am going to be a successful doctor, making a massive salary, and I threw a tantrum over $80,000 while Keisha is fighting so hard to build her empire. I was hoarding my blessings. I forgot that our wealth belongs to the whole family. I forgot my proper place in this household. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and absolutely sickening. The hostility vanished entirely, replaced by a wave of toxic, triumphant validation. Valerie stood up and walked over to me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. She was practically glowing. "Oh, my sweet girl," Valerie cooed, pulling me into a stifling hug. "I knew the Lord would speak to your heart. I knew you would finally wake up and see the bigger picture. We do not want to fight with you, Nia. We just want you to act like a true Black woman who uplifts her family. You cannot climb to the top of the mountain and kick the ladder away. We rise together. You are finally acting like a daughter I can be proud of." Desmond nodded vigorously from the sofa, a wide, patronizing smile spreading across his face. "That takes a lot of maturity to admit you were wrong," Nia, Desmond declared, crossing his arms in satisfaction. "We forgive you. We are family. Family fights, but at the end of the day, we protect our own. You are going to be a brilliant doctor, and now you have the right mindset to go with it." Keisha walked over and handed me a tissue, acting the part of the gracious, forgiving older sister. "See how much easier things are when you drop the arrogant attitude," Keisha said, patting my arm condescendingly. "We are building generational wealth here, Nia. The $80,000 is just seed money. Terrence and I are going to multiply that investment and bring millions back into this household. You just have to trust the process and support your blood." I nodded furiously, dabbing at my eyes with the tissue, burying my face in my hands to hide the sheer revulsion twisting my features. I was disgusted by their eager acceptance of my subjugation. They did not just want my money. They wanted my total, absolute submission. They wanted me on my knees, thanking them for robbing me. But the trap was now perfectly set. They had swallowed the bait completely. They fully believed they had broken me with the medical board blackmail. I was no longer a threat. I was a compliant, useful asset to them. Terrence, who had been quietly observing the entire performance, finally stood up from his armchair. He adjusted the lapels of his expensive blazer, a blazer likely purchased with my stolen funds. He walked over to me, exuding the fake charm of a con artist who believed he was the smartest man in the room. He looked at my tear-stained face and saw exactly what he wanted to see. A highly educated, highly credentialed doctor who was entirely under their control. "Now this is what I like to see," Terrence announced, clapping his hands together. "A united front. We have a medical doctor in the family who finally understands the vision. This calls for a real celebration. Not just sitting around the house, but a proper toast to our new alignment." Terrence reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, checking his schedule with an exaggerated sense of self-importance. "Listen, Nia. Since you are finally on board with the family vision, I want to officially bring you into the fold. I am hosting a very exclusive VIP business dinner this Friday night at that new Japanese steakhouse downtown. I am meeting with some heavy hitters to finalize the details for Keisha and my new luxury spa venture. I want you there." Terrence smiled a slick, predatory smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I want my brilliant doctor sister-in-law sitting at my table representing the family intellect. Dress nice. We have big things to discuss, and I might need your specialized expertise for some upcoming paperwork." I looked up at him, keeping my expression docile and compliant. "I would love to come, Terrence," I said softly, my voice practically dripping with fake gratitude. "Thank you for including me. I will be there." Terrence nodded, looking immensely satisfied with his own perceived power. As I walked out of their house that evening, playing the part of the grateful, submissive daughter until the door clicked shut behind me, my tears instantly dried. The sadness vanished completely, replaced by a ruthless, calculating calm. Terrence thought he had just recruited a useful idiot for his fraudulent schemes. He had no idea he had just invited the architect of his total destruction right to his own dinner table. The game was on. "How would you like to handle the details of this VIP dinner?" Friday evening arrived with a suffocating humidity that clung to my skin as I handed my keys to the valet outside of Akatsuki, an expensive sushi restaurant located in the downtown financial district. The exterior was sleek and minimalist, but the inside was a loud, ostentatious display of wealth. I smoothed down my black dress and followed the hostess toward the private dining alcoves in the back. I was an operative walking right into hostile territory. When the hostess slid open the rice paper screen doors, I was greeted by a scene that perfectly encapsulated my sister and her husband. Keisha and Terrence were seated at the head of a long, polished mahogany table holding court. One was a sleazy-looking real estate broker wearing a suit that was one size too small, and the other was a silent, intimidating man who looked more like a private security guard than an investor. Keisha was dripping in diamonds, her stolen Chanel bag sitting prominently on the empty chair beside her. "Nia, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Terrence boomed, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. He stood up, extending his arms in a grandiose gesture, as if he owned the entire building. "Come sit down now, doctor. We saved the best seat for our favorite physician." I forced a polite, tight smile and took the seat across from them. The real estate broker eyed me with a slick, calculating gaze, while the silent man simply poured himself another glass of sake. Keisha leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her diamond bracelets clinking against the polished wood. She looked at me with that familiar, condescending warmth she reserved for moments when she felt absolutely superior. "We have been telling our associates about you," Nia, Keisha purred, swirling the clear liquid in her glass. "I was just explaining to Marcus here how the Washington women are taking over the wellness industry. Our new venture is going to completely revolutionize the luxury market in this city." Terrence clapped his hands together, rubbing his palms in a display of greedy anticipation. "Let me break it down for you, Nia. We are opening an ultra-premium wellness center, the Oasis Med Spa and Salon. It is not just a place to get your nails done. We are talking high-end aesthetics, vitamin infusions, holistic rejuvenation, and elite clientele. We secured a massive commercial space right in the most expensive retail district. The demographics are perfect. We are going to be pulling in 7 figures by the end of year 1. I kept my expression bright and appropriately awed, nodding along, as I picked up my chopsticks to eat a piece of sashimi while Terrence spun his web of financial delusions. "It sounds incredibly ambitious, Terrence," I said, making sure to inject just the right amount of sisterly admiration into my voice. "How are you managing the startup costs for a commercial lease of that magnitude in that specific district?" Terrence smiled, a wide, predatory grin flashing his unnaturally white veneers. "That is the beauty of liquid capital, Nia. We used the $50,000 from your grandmother as our initial deposit to lock down the lease agreement. It showed the property management company that we have serious backing. But a vision this grand requires massive infrastructure. We need state-of-the-art medical equipment, high-end renovations, and a luxury marketing rollout." Keisha picked up the thread, her tone shifting into a practiced corporate pitch that she had clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror. That is where we leverage the family assets, Nia. We are establishing this as a medical spa, which opens up incredible funding opportunities. But traditional banks are notoriously difficult when it comes to backing Black-owned businesses. They throw up red tape and demand ridiculous collateral. So we are bypassing the traditional banking system entirely. We are securing a massive loan directly through the Small Business Administration, a federal SBA loan. The words hit the air and hung there heavy and dangerous. I knew what an SBA loan entailed. It was federal money backed by the United States government, requiring rigorous financial disclosures, spotless credit history, and absolute transparency. Terrence leaned across the table, his cologne smelling sharp and metallic. The broker Marcus pulled a thick stack of documents from his leather briefcase and slid them precisely into the center of the table. The federal funding is practically guaranteed, Terrence explained, tapping the stack of papers with his index finger. The business plan is flawless. The location is prime. There is just one tiny administrative hurdle we need to clear before they release the funds to our corporate account. I looked at the documents, then back at Terrence, maintaining my carefully constructed mask of innocent curiosity. What kind of hurdle? I asked softly. Terrence sighed, waving his hand dismissively, as if discussing a minor traffic ticket rather than a massive financial hurdle. The SBA requires a guarantor for the loan because the business entity is brand new. They want to see a co-signer with an impeccable professional background and a flawless credit score to anchor the application. My credit took a small hit a few years ago during a restructuring phase, and Keisha does not have a formal W-2 income history right now. The feds want someone with a professional medical title on the paperwork to validate the medical spa classification. Keisha leaned across the table, her eyes locking onto mine. The mask of the gracious sister slipped away, revealing the ruthless blackmailer underneath. Her gaze was hard, unyielding, and completely devoid of empathy. "We need a co-signer with a medical doctor title, Nia," she stated, her voice dropping to a low, demanding register. "We need your name, your medical license number, and your pristine credit score on these federal documents tonight. It is just a formality. You will not actually have to pay a single dime. The business revenue will cover the monthly loan payments easily. You are just providing the credential anchor we need to get the cash released into our business account immediately." The trap was finally sprung, and it was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. They had dragged me to this expensive restaurant to forcefully conscript me into their financial ruin. They were demanding that I attach my hard-earned medical license and my flawless credit to a massive federal loan, ensuring that when their fake business inevitably collapsed, I would be the one held financially and legally responsible by the United States government. They wanted me to be their ultimate human shield, holding the bag when the creditors came knocking at the door. "You want me to co-sign a federal business loan?" I asked, letting a small amount of genuine hesitation leak into my voice. "Terrence, that is a massive liability. I am just starting my pediatric residency. I have my own student debt to worry about. If something goes wrong with the spa, the government could garnish my hospital wages or come after my license." Keisha slammed her hand down on the table, rattling the expensive plates. The fake warmth was entirely gone. "Nothing is going to go wrong," Nia, Keisha hissed, her voice sharp and threatening. "We are family. We protect each other. Remember our conversation at the house 3 days ago. Remember the choices you made to keep your little psychiatric secrets safe. You agreed to support this family. You agreed to be a team player. This is how you prove it. You sign the paper and you help us build our empire. If you refuse, we go right back to square one, and I make that phone call to your residency director tomorrow morning." The extortion was naked and absolute, right in front of the sleazy broker and the silent security guard sitting there. Terrence pushed the thick stack of federal documents directly in front of me. He uncapped a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen and placed it deliberately on top of the signature page. "It is just a formality," Nia, Terrence repeated, his eyes cold and predatory. Sign the papers, and we can all go back to celebrating your graduation and our new business. Be the good, successful doctor sister that we all know you are today. I stared down at the documents. The header clearly read United States Small Business Administration Commercial Loan Guarantee. This was not a private bank loan. This was federal money. Lying on these forms, misrepresenting the source of the down payment or falsifying business structures was a direct violation of federal law. It was wire fraud, bank fraud, and a federal felony. Terrence was committing a massive federal crime, and he was arrogantly forcing me to be his accomplice. A slow, icy calm washed over my entire body. I looked at the golden pen resting on the federal documents. I realized in that exact moment that Terrence was not just committing fraud. He was handing me the absolute perfect weapon to destroy his entire life. I reached for the pen. Sunday morning arrived with the suffocating heat of an Atlanta summer, but the air inside the sanctuary of the Greater Zion Fellowship megachurch was aggressively chilled by industrial air conditioners. The stained glass windows cast long, colorful shadows across the polished wooden floors, adding an air of sacred weight to the morning proceedings. Our family always occupied the third pew on the right side of the center aisle. It was true prime real estate, close enough for the pastor to acknowledge us during his sermons, but angled perfectly so the congregation could admire my parents' expensive tailored suits and custom hats. Today, the entire Washington family was putting on a masterclass in theatrical deception. My mother, Valerie, walked down the plush carpeted aisle like a conquering queen. She wore an ostentatious yellow suit with a wide-brimmed hat that demanded attention from everyone in the sanctuary. My father, Desmond, flanked her, wearing a crisp gray suit and walking with an exaggerated slow stride meant to convey profound dignity. Keisha and Terrence followed closely behind them, holding hands and projecting the image of a deeply blessed, prosperous young couple. I walked at the very back of our little parade, wearing a simple conservative dress, playing my designated role as the quiet background character. The church seated over 3,000 members, and the atmosphere was electric with Sunday worship. The choir sang. I sat down on the padded wooden pew, keeping my hands neatly folded in my lap. I smiled politely at the ushers and nodded at the familiar faces of the church elders who passed by. To the untrained eye, I was just a humble, respectful daughter, attending service with her successful family. Beneath my calm exterior, my mind was calculating every variable of the trap I set. The service commenced with the usual extravagant announcements. Pastor Davis, a charismatic man who loved prosperity theology, took the stage. He paced across the pulpit, his voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence that mesmerized the congregation. He wiped sweat from his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief, declaring that God was ready to pour out unmerited favor on those who honored their bloodline. He insisted that true believers do not hold back their resources when their own flesh and blood are trying to rise up from the ashes of systemic oppression. He preached about financial breakthroughs, generational blessings, and the absolute necessity of sowing seeds of wealth into the family bloodline. Every word he spoke validated my parents' twisted mindset. They nodded vigorously, shouting agreement and raising their hands in performative worship. When the time arrived for the weekly testimony service, my stomach tightened. This was the moment the congregation was invited to share how their lives had been miraculously blessed over the past week. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Valerie stood up, smoothing her yellow skirt and motioning for the usher to bring a microphone. She snatched it from the young man, her eyes scanning the sea of faces in the auditorium. The spotlight from the ceiling illuminated her brightly, making the rhinestones on her expensive jacket sparkle with blinding intensity. She played the crowd perfectly, pausing at all the right moments to let the congregation absorb the manufactured weight of her fabricated struggles. "Praise the Lord, saints!" Valerie began, her voice ringing with emotion. "I stand before you today, a deeply humbled and profoundly blessed mother. God is moving mightily in the Washington household." The congregation murmured their approval. Valerie paused, letting the tension build before raising her hand toward the ceiling. "I want to testify about my beautiful eldest daughter, Keisha, and her brilliant husband, Terrence. The Lord has opened a massive door of financial prosperity for them. Next week, they are officially launching the Oasis Med Spa and Salon, a luxury wellness center right in the heart of the downtown financial district. Applause rolled through the sanctuary. Several women seated near the front row stood up and cheered loudly, praising the Lord for young Black entrepreneurs who were breaking barriers. They clapped their hands and shouted hallelujah, completely oblivious to the fact that they were applauding a pair of ruthless grifters who had shamelessly robbed a pediatric resident blind just to fund an empty, superficial vanity project. Keisha stood up, giving a modest little wave to the crowd, looking like a humble servant receiving divine favor. Terrence patted his chest, looking solemn. I watched the entire charade without blinking. I watched them accept the praise and admiration of 3,000 people for a business funded entirely by wire fraud, identity theft, and my stolen $80,000. But the Lord tests us before He blesses us. Valerie continued, her voice dropping to a mournful, theatrical pitch. Building this was not easy. The enemy tried to attack our finances. The enemy tried to create division in our home. We made painful sacrifices to secure the capital for this venture. We had to dig deep into our own pockets to fund their vision, because traditional banks turn their backs on young visionary entrepreneurs. We gave everything we had to make sure our daughter could build a legacy. The sheer audacity of her public lies was breathtaking. Valerie was standing in the middle of a church holding a microphone and brazenly claiming that she and Desmond had financed the luxury spa out of their own empty pockets. She was transforming her vile theft into a heroic tale of parental sacrifice. She was painting herself as a martyr who had given up her own financial security to bless her child. And sometimes, Valerie added, turning her body slightly so she was looking down at the pew where I sat, sometimes the people you expect to support the family vision are the ones whose hearts are hardened by secular pride. Sometimes you send a child to get a fancy education, and they come back with a piece of paper, but absolutely no understanding of family loyalty. Sometimes the ones with the most education are the ones who refuse to sow a single seed into the family harvest. The sanctuary fell uncomfortably quiet. The church members were not stupid. They knew exactly who Valerie was talking about. Dozens of eyes shifted toward me, darting away just as quickly. The whispering started immediately. They looked at me sitting there quietly and saw exactly what my mother wanted them to see. A selfish, arrogant doctor who was hoarding her wealth while her struggling parents sacrificed everything to help her sister. Valerie was using the sacred pulpit to publicly shame me. She was character assassinating me in front of the entire community, isolating me socially so that I would have no support system left to fall back on. The heavy, oppressive silence felt like it was pressing down on my chest, trying to force me into a posture of submission. The collective judgment of the entire church community was a weapon my mother wielded with terrifying precision. She wanted me to feel so alienated, so utterly despised by my own people, that I would have no choice but to crawl back to her and beg for forgiveness. She wanted to break my spirit entirely, making me compliant and willing to empty my bank accounts for her future demands. I did not break character. I did not glare at her. I did not stand up and defend myself. I simply looked up at my mother and offered her a soft, placid smile. I let my shoulders relax. I projected complete, unbothered tranquility. I knew something that 3,000 people in this room did not know. I knew that the federal government already had the audio file of Terrence confessing to wire fraud. I knew that Grandma Ruby owned the physical building they were bragging about. Valerie was busy building a magnificent sandcastle on the beach, completely unaware that a massive tidal wave was already crashing toward the shore. Valerie finished her testimony to a standing ovation. She handed the microphone back to the usher and returned to our pew, wiping a fake tear from her eye. The pastor resumed his sermon, praising my family for their incredible dedication to uplifting one another. The rest of the 2-hour service felt like a surreal blur. The choir sang, the offering plates were passed around, and the congregation rejoiced in the illusion of our family's success. When the service finally concluded, the massive congregation began to disperse into the aisles. I stood up, picking up my purse, ready to quietly slip out the side exit. I needed to get away from the suffocating hypocrisy. But before I could take 3 steps, A firm hand clamped down onto my shoulder. I turned around to find Valerie blocking my path. Desmond stood right behind her. Next to him was Pastor Davis and three prominent church elders. They boxed me into the corner, cutting off my exit. The friendly smiles vanished. The real extortion was just about to begin. Pastor Davis stepped forward, his face arranged in a mask of pastoral concern that barely concealed his greedy anticipation. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing tight enough to let me know I was not going anywhere. Sister Nia, the pastor, began, his voice dripping with that artificial holy resonance he used to extract extra tithes from vulnerable widows. Your mother has shared the heavy burden on her heart. She wept in my office just yesterday, pouring out her soul about the financial strain of helping your sister build her business. The Lord has blessed you with a prestigious medical degree. You are stepping into a season of immense financial harvest. It is time for you to sow a seed of faith and lift the yoke from your parents' weary shoulders. Valerie dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, leaning against my father, as if the sheer weight of her fabricated sacrifices was causing her to physically collapse. Desmond wrapped his arm around her waist, looking at me with stern authoritarian disappointment. We are only asking you to do what is right by God and by this family, Desmond stated, his voice echoing slightly in the empty vestibule. Your sister Keisha needs a final cash injection to cover the opening day operational costs. The vendors require immediate payment for the luxury spa equipment. We have completely tapped out our savings trying to cover the initial lease deposits. We need $5,000 from you right now to ensure the grand opening is a success. Show this congregation that you are not the selfish hoarder the devil is trying to make you out to be. The three church elders nodded in unison, murmuring agreements and crossing their arms. They had physically barricaded the exit, serving as a wall of intimidating men. They were using the sanctuary of God as a shakedown room. I looked at the men surrounding me, their expensive suits and polished shoes bought with the hard-earned money of their working-class congregation. I looked at my mother, who was watching me through the narrow slits of her eyes, waiting for me to break down, cry, or cause a scene that she could weaponize against me later. They fully expected me to panic. They anticipated a loud defensive argument that would only serve to prove Valerie right about my supposed instability and disrespect. Instead, I let a serene, peaceful smile spread across my face. I looked directly into Pastor Davis' eyes, keeping my expression entirely submissive and bright. You are absolutely right, Pastor, I said, my voice soft and accommodating. Family is the most important blessing we have. I have been so consumed with the grueling hours of my pediatric residency that I lost sight of the bigger picture. I should be supporting my older sister as she steps into her new identity as a successful business owner. The shock on Valerie's face was instantaneous and incredibly satisfying. She had geared up for a massive screaming match, and my sudden total compliance knocked the wind completely out of her sails. Desmond blinked rapidly, loosening his aggressive posture. Pastor Davis smiled widely, his chest puffing out with the pride of a man who believed his spiritual authority had just conquered a rebellious child. Praise God, the pastor proclaimed, raising his hands. The Holy Spirit is moving in this place today. I reached into my designer handbag that I had purchased at a thrift store and refurbished myself. I pulled out my sleek leather-bound checkbook and a silver pen. I did not hesitate. I did not check my bank balances. I simply opened the checkbook right there in the church vestibule. I smoothed the paper against the wooden podium near the baptismal font. My hand moved with steady, fluid precision as I wrote out the check for exactly $5,000. I made it payable directly to Keisha and Terrence, ensuring there was a clear, documented paper trail connecting this specific extortion to their fraudulent business enterprise. I filled in the memo line with meticulous care, writing the words for luxury spa opening day vendor costs. Every single stroke of my pen was a calculated move, securing another piece of evidence for the federal investigators. I tore the check from the binding and turned back to my mother, holding the small piece of paper out to her. Valerie stared at the check as if it were a venomous snake momentarily paralyzed by her own successful manipulation. She snatched it from my fingers, her greed quickly overriding her initial shock. A triumphant, greedy light sparked in her eyes as she verified the amount. "You made the right choice," Nia, Valerie whispered, her tone laced with patronizing superiority. "I knew you would eventually remember your place in this family. You are finally acting like a Washington." Keisha and Terrence came strolling down the hallway just in time to see the transaction completed. Keisha spotted the check in our mother hand and her face lit up with absolute euphoria. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around me in a suffocating theatrical embrace. "Oh, Nia, thank you so much," Keisha squealed, pressing her cheek against mine. "I knew you would step up for the grand opening. I will make sure everyone knows my little sister contributed to the empire." Terrence nodded, adjusting his Rolex. "Good looks, Doctor," he said smoothly. "Welcome to the winning team." I hugged Keisha back, patting her shoulder gently. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Keisha," I said, injecting my voice with enough fake warmth to melt butter. "I cannot wait to see what happens at the grand opening. It is going to be a day that absolutely nobody in this family will ever forget." I stepped back from the group, smoothing my skirt. I gave the pastor and the church elders one final respectful nod, thanking them for their spiritual guidance. I turned my back on my family and walked out of the massive church doors, stepping into the blinding glare of the Sunday afternoon sun. I kept my pace even and unhurried, waving politely to a few church members lingering in the parking lot. I did not run. I did not drop my smile. I maintained the absolute picture of a supportive, loving sister right until I reached my beat-up sedan parked at the far edge of the lot. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed it shut, locking it immediately. The heavy thud of the car door closing severed my connection to the toxic world outside. The fake smile vanished instantly, evaporating from my face like water on a hot stove. The suffocating heat of the car wrapped around me, but I felt nothing but ice-cold adrenaline surging through my veins. The performance was officially over. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the encrypted folder, where I had securely stored the audio recording of Terrence confessing to wire fraud and money laundering at the sushi restaurant. I also pulled up the high-resolution scanned copies of the Federal Small Business Administration loan documents, bearing my deliberately invalidated signature. I had everything prepared, meticulously categorized and properly labeled. I opened my secure email and drafted a message to the Internal Revenue Service. I copied the Small Business Administration Office of Inspector General. I attached the audio file, the forged loan documents, and a detailed chronological timeline of how Terrence and Valerie had conspired to steal $80,000 to illegally fund a fraudulent commercial lease. I included the exact banking routing numbers, the dates of the wire transfers, and the $5,000 check I had just written under duress, acting as the final nail in their financial coffin. I reviewed the email one last time, ensuring every piece of evidence was perfectly aligned with federal fraud statutes. I hit send. The confirmation graphic verified the encrypted package was delivered to the authorities. I did not stop there. I dialed the direct federal tip line for the FBI in Atlanta. The phone rang twice before a stern professional agent answered. I provided my full legal name, my medical credentials, and my contact information. I calmly informed the federal agent that a massive wire fraud scheme involving falsified federal loan applications and stolen personal funds was currently culminating at a commercial property downtown. I gave them the exact address of the Oasis Med Spa and Salon. I told them the primary suspect, Terrence Miller, would be hosting a highly publicized grand opening event at that exact location on Tuesday morning. I assured the agent that all supporting documentary evidence was already sitting in their agency inbox. The trap was set, loaded, and completely inescapable. I hung up, started my car engine, and drove out of the lot, leaving my family to enjoy their final 48 hours of freedom. The sun rose brightly on the morning of the grand opening. Casting a golden glow over the downtown financial district. The Oasis Med Spa and Salon sat on a prime corner lot, projecting an image of absolute luxury. Terrence and Keisha had spared no expense using the stolen funds and their fraudulent federal loan to transform the commercial space into a dazzling spectacle. A massive red carpet stretched from the double glass doors down to the pristine sidewalk, flanked by velvet ropes and towering floral arrangements of white orchids and imported lilies. The sheer vanity of it was staggering. Valerie and Desmond arrived early, treating the event like their own personal coronation. My mother wore an extravagant emerald green dress that screamed for attention, while my father strutted around in a custom-tailored suit. They stood near the entrance, personally greeting the local influencers, high society figures, and prominent members of our church congregation. Pastor Davis walked the red carpet holding a gold-embossed Bible, ready to bless the fraudulent enterprise. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the loud popping of champagne corks. It was a masterpiece of total criminal delusion. Terrence was in his absolute element, playing the role of the visionary self-made mogul. He held a crystal flute of vintage champagne in one hand and gestured expansively with the other while giving an interview to a local lifestyle magazine reporter. He bragged loudly about his brilliant investment strategies, his relentless work ethic, and his commitment to building Black generational wealth. He spun a ridiculous fictional tale about starting from the bottom, completely omitting the fact that his initial capital was stolen from a pediatric resident, and his business loan was secured through federal wire fraud. Keisha was equally insufferable. She had hired 2 professional photographers to follow her every move, ensuring her social media followers saw every angle of her fake triumph. She posed in front of a massive flower wall, wearing a white designer gown that clung to her figure, barking orders at the hired staff like a tyrannical dictator. She spotted the pastor and rushed over to embrace him, making sure the cameras captured her pious humility. She was thoroughly convinced that she had outsmarted me, outsmarted the government, and officially cemented her status as the ultimate golden child. I parked my beat-up sedan a block away and walked toward the event. I did not wear my usual scrubs or my clearance rack dresses. Today I wore a razor-sharp, tailored black suit. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a surgeon about to perform a critical operation. As I approached the velvet ropes, the hired security guard recognized me from the guest list and unclipped the barrier. I stepped onto the red carpet, my presence immediately sending a ripple of tension through my family. Valerie spotted me first, and her fake smile faltered. "Nia, you actually came," Valerie said, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and smug satisfaction. She quickly recovered her composure, pulling me into a stifling theatrical hug for the benefit of the church elders standing nearby. "I am so glad you decided to support your sister today. This is what family looks like." Desmond clapped me heavily on the shoulder, a patronizing smirk plastered across his face. "Good to see you making an effort, Nia. Look around. This is what real ambition builds." I just smiled pleasantly, keeping my hands casually tucked into my pockets. Keisha abandoned her photo shoot and strutted over to me, her heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete. She looked me up and down, her eyes gleaming with toxic triumph. "Thank you for the $5,000 check," Nia Keisha purred, leaning in close so only I could hear. "It paid for the open bar and the floral arrangements. Do not worry, I will make sure to give you a little shout-out on my Instagram story later. You know, as a thank you to my little sister for helping fund the empire." Her breath smelled like champagne and unearned arrogance. I held her gaze, my expression utterly serene. "You are very welcome, Keisha," I replied, my voice completely devoid of anger or sarcasm. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for today. "Enjoy every single second of this grand opening. You have truly earned whatever comes next." Keisha blinked, slightly unnerved by my absolute calm, but her massive ego quickly brushed it aside. Terrence walked over, wrapping a possessive arm around his wife. "The doctor is in the house," Terrence boomed, raising his glass. "Have a drink, Nia. The champagne is top tier, just like the business." I politely declined the drink, stepping back to observe the spectacle. The music pumped through high-end outdoor speakers, vibrating in my chest. Waiters circulated with large silver trays of warm appetizers. The pastor prepared to take his place at the front doors for the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. Everyone was laughing, drinking, and basking in the fake glory of the Oasis Med Spa and Salon. They were entirely oblivious to the reality that they were dancing on the deck of the Titanic. I checked my watch. The timing was perfectly aligned with the schedule I had arranged. A sudden hush fell over the perimeter of the crowd. The heavy bass of the music was abruptly drowned out by the deep rumbling engine of an armored black SUV pulling up directly to the curb. It bypassed the valet stand, entirely parking illegally in the fire lane, right in front of the red carpet. The heavy tinted windows obscured the passengers, but the imposing nature of the vehicle commanded immediate respect. Terrence frowned, his annoyance flashing as his interview was interrupted. He motioned for his hired security guard to tell the driver to move the vehicle. Before the guard could take 3 steps, the rear door of the SUV swung open. The air in the financial district seemed to instantly freeze. 2 men stepped out first. They were not valets. They were highly paid corporate attorneys, wearing bespoke charcoal suits, carrying thick leather briefcases, and exuding an aura of absolute legal devastation. They stood on either side of the door, flanking it like heavily armed sentinels. Then a sleek silver cane emerged, followed by an impeccably polished pair of designer shoes. Grandma Ruby stepped out onto the concrete pavement, completely ignoring the red carpet. She wore a striking crimson suit, her silver hair catching the morning sun. She did not look frail or arthritic. She looked like a billionaire matriarch arriving to execute a hostile takeover. The entire Washington family froze in absolute terror. Valerie dropped her jaw, her eyes bulging out of her head as if she had just seen a ghost materializing in broad daylight. Desmond took an involuntary step backward, bumping into the flower wall. Keisha gripped Terrence's arm, her manicured nails digging into his expensive blazer. The champagne flute in Terrence's hand trembled, spilling expensive liquor onto his shoes. Grandma Ruby did not smile. She did not wave to the pastor. She did not acknowledge the local influencers or the magazine reporters. She walked with terrifying purpose directly through the crowd, parting the sea of guests like Moses parting the Red Sea. The corporate attorneys marched in lockstep right behind her, their faces stony and impassive. The joyful celebratory atmosphere of the grand opening evaporated in an instant, replaced by a suffocating cloud of impending doom. The guests murmured nervously, shifting their gaze from the imposing elderly woman to the suddenly terrified owners of the luxury spa. I watched the color completely drain from my mother's face. She knew Grandma Ruby rarely traveled, and she absolutely knew that Ruby appearing unannounced with legal counsel meant catastrophic destruction. Mom, Desmond whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "What are you doing here? We did not expect you." Grandma Ruby stopped directly in front of them, planting her silver cane firmly on the ground. "You did not expect me because you are thieves and cowards, Desmond," she stated, her voice projecting clearly over the fading background music. "You thought you could steal from my granddaughter and hide behind a church pulpit." Terrence tried to salvage his ruined event, throwing on his fake charm. "Grandma Ruby, this is a misunderstanding. We are launching a legitimate corporate entity today. You are disrupting a major press event." Grandma Ruby turned her dark, piercing eyes onto Terrence. "You do not have a corporate entity, Terrence. You have a crime scene." She turned her head slightly, addressing one of her corporate attorneys. "Shut that ridiculous noise off." The attorney nodded, walking swiftly past the velvet ropes. He approached the DJ booth, ignoring the protests of the hired staff, and abruptly pulled the main audio cable. The music died instantly, leaving only the sound of city traffic and panicked breathing. The ultimate reckoning was finally ready to begin right here in front of the entire shocked community. The sudden silence was heavier than the pounding bass had been just a moment before. Everyone stood completely frozen. Terrence lowered his champagne flute, his slick smile vanishing as confusion rippled through the gathered crowd of local influencers and high society figures. The church pastor stopped mid-sentence, lowering his gold-embossed Bible. Keisha paused her glamorous photo shoot, her perfect posture crumbling into rigid panic. Desmond and Valerie exchanged terrified glances, their worst nightmare manifesting right on the red carpet. They watched in absolute horror as the imposing figure of my grandmother approached them with purposeful, lethal strides today. I stood a few feet away, my hands casually resting in the pockets of my tailored black suit. I projected an aura of absolute unbothered serenity while the chaotic scene unfolded before me. The hired security guards looked uncertain, shifting their weight awkwardly, but neither of them dared to intervene. The two sharp-suited corporate attorneys flanked Grandma Ruby, creating an impenetrable wall of legal authority. They exuded a terrifying level of professional menace. Their heavy leather briefcases swung in unison, with each step signaling the impending destruction of my family's fraudulent empire built on stolen funds and lies now. Valerie was the first to break the suffocating silence. Her emerald green dress swished frantically as she rushed forward, attempting a desperate, pathetic recovery. "Mom, what is the meaning of this?" Valerie shrieked, forcing a nervous, high-pitched laugh that sounded completely unhinged. "You are ruining Keisha and her special day. This is a massive professional event. You cannot just storm in here and shut down our music. Please let us go inside the private office and discuss this family misunderstanding like civilized adults. The community is watching us right now and you are making us look completely ridiculous today." Grandma Ruby did not even blink. She completely ignored her daughter, brushing past her as if she were nothing more than a minor gust of wind. Desmond attempted to block her path, puffing out his chest to project false authority. "Mom, you need to leave right now," Desmond growled, sweating profusely under his custom suit. "You are trespassing on a commercial property. We have important investors here today." Terrence stepped forward, puffing his chest to mirror Desmond. "Listen to him," Terrence demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "I leased this building, and I will call the police on you immediately today." Grandma Ruby stopped and fixed her dark, piercing eyes squarely onto Terrence. "You want to call the police?" "Terrence?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that sent chills down my spine. "Please do. I highly encourage it. In fact, I think the federal authorities would be extremely interested to hear exactly how you secured the funding for this fraudulent enterprise." The color completely drained from his face. His arrogant facade shattered instantly, replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. He took a clumsy step backward, bumping into the extravagant flower wall behind him, almost knocking it over completely. Keisha let out a dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands. She abandoned her photo shoot entirely and rushed over to her husband, playing the role of the overwhelmed victim. "This is your fault," Keisha screamed, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at me. "You brought her here. You set us up because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me. You could not handle the fact that I was building a massive empire while you were stuck working miserable hospital shifts. You want to ruin my life because you are a miserable, bitter person today." Her projection was staggering, but it no longer held any power over me. I looked at my older sister with complete and utter apathy. "I am not jealous of a fake empire built on stolen money and federal wire fraud, Keisha." I stated, my voice calm and projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. "I am simply reclaiming the respect and the boundaries that this family refused to honor. You threatened to destroy my medical license. You blackmailed me with stolen psychiatric records. You thought you could use my trauma to force me into signing fraudulent loan documents quickly. Now you are facing the consequences of your own vicious arrogance." The crowd erupted into loud, chaotic murmurs. The revelation of blackmail and federal fraud was too scandalous for the local high society figures to ignore. Several guests quietly set their champagne glasses down on passing trays and began edging toward the exit, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. Valerie fell to her knees right there on the red carpet, weeping loudly and tearing at her hair, playing the ultimate victim. "Lord, why are you testing me?" Valerie wailed, looking up at the bright blue morning sky today. "Why is my own mother trying to destroy my family? I did everything for these girls. I sacrificed my youth to raise them." Grandma Ruby looked down at her weeping daughter with absolute disgust. "Get up off that dirty concrete, Valerie. You look pathetic. You did not sacrifice anything. You enabled a parasite because he rented expensive cars and made you feel important. You sacrificed Nia and her brilliant future just to maintain a fragile illusion of wealth. You are a terrible mother and a worse businesswoman. Now the illusion is completely shattered in front of the entire community today." Pastor Davis stepped forward, sensing the shifting tide of the room. He held his gold-embossed Bible tightly against his chest. Sister Ruby the pastor began using his most soothing pastoral tone. "This is a day of rejoicing and financial harvest for your grandchildren. Let us not allow the enemy to sow division in the family bloodline, right here on the red carpet. We can take this conversation into a private room and pray over it. The Lord wants unity in this household." He reached out to gently touch her arm, attempting to guide her away from the audience quickly. "Do not you dare touch me or use the name of the Lord to cover up a crime scene." "Pastor Davis," she warned. Her voice sliced through the tension, silencing him instantly. "There is no prayer that can sanitize wire fraud. There is no scripture that justifies stealing from a medical student who sold her blood to survive." Terrence balled his fists, breathing heavily like a cornered animal. He looked around wildly, searching for a way out of the disaster. "This is defamation," Terrence yelled, pointing aggressively at the corporate attorneys. "I will sue all of you for slander immediately. I have a legitimate federal loan. I have a legally binding commercial lease. You cannot just walk in here and ruin my grand opening." One of the corporate attorneys stepped forward, opening his thick leather briefcase right on top of a cocktail table. He pulled out a stack of legally certified documents, bearing official state seals and heavy watermarks. He handed the top document directly to Terrence, whose hands shook violently as he took the paper. "That is a certified notice of immediate lease termination." The attorney stated, his voice loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear clearly today. "And the document underneath it is a formal notification of ownership transfer." Terrence stared blankly at the complex legal jargon, his panic rapidly escalating as his mind struggled to comprehend the severity of the situation. "What does this even mean?" Terrence demanded, his voice cracking with fear. "I have a 10-year lease on this building. You cannot terminate it without cause. There are tenant protection laws. You cannot just break a commercial contract because you are mad about some family dispute." The church elders in the front row exchanged horrified glances, whispering frantically among themselves, assessing the damage completely. I watched the absolute demolition of my parents' toxic empire silently. I did not try to de-escalate the situation. I observed the consequences of their relentless greed. They had expected me to cower to write checks and to fund their vanity projects indefinitely. They thought the black tax was an absolute mandate that I could never escape. Instead, they were discovering the devastating reality of crossing someone who had nothing left to lose. The guests continued to back away, their whispers growing louder as the scandal deepened. The red carpet event had officially transformed into an active public execution today. Grandma Ruby was not finished. She needed everyone present to hear exactly what was happening. She needed the pastor, the influencers, the church elders, and the entire community to witness the absolute dismantling of the fraudulent Washington legacy. She turned away from Terrence and Desmond, her silver cane tapping against the pavement as she moved with lethal intent. She bypassed the corporate attorneys and ignored Keisha's dramatic wailing. Her eyes locked onto the stage setup where the audio equipment rested silently. With completely absolute and truly terrifying purpose, Grandma Ruby walks straight to the DJ booth and demands the microphone. The DJ froze, his hands hovering anxiously above the digital soundboard as Grandma Ruby slammed her heavy silver cane against the metal scaffolding of the booth. "Hand me that microphone right now," she commanded, her voice slicing through the thick morning air like a newly sharpened blade. The young DJ, terrified by the sheer force of her unyielding presence, practically shoved the wireless microphone into her waiting hand and scrambled backward, tripping over his own audio cables in his haste to escape her wrath. Grandma Ruby turned slowly to face the sprawling crowd of local influencers, high society elites, and prominent church elders. She tapped the microphone once, creating a sharp feedback pop that made everyone in the front row flinch and cover their ears. The luxurious red carpet, which just moments ago had been a glorious stage for my sister and her fraudulent husband, was now entirely under the absolute control of the true matriarch of this family. Grandma Ruby surveyed the magnificent floral walls, the imported champagne towers, and the massive custom neon sign bearing the name of the Oasis Med Spa and Salon. She let out a dry, echoing chuckle that resonated powerfully through the professional-grade outdoor speakers. Beautiful building. Grandma Ruby announced, her amplified voice completely steady and dripping with lethal authority. I really should know. I bought it last week in a private, all-cash corporate transaction. A collective, violent gasp ripped through the audience, echoing down the busy downtown street. The high society women gasped in sheer disbelief. The reporter immediately signaled his cameraman to start recording. Pastor Davis took 2 large steps backward, bumping hard into a passing waiter and sending a silver tray of expensive appetizers crashing onto the concrete pavement. The shattering porcelain punctuated the heavy silence. Grandma Ruby turned her unforgiving eyes onto Terrence and Keisha. They looked completely drained of blood. Keisha swayed dangerously on her high heels, grasping the velvet rope just to keep herself upright, while her face turned a sickly shade of gray. As the sole legal owner of this commercial property, Grandma Ruby continued, her voice booming across the financial district. I am executing an immediate termination of your commercial lease. Your contract is officially completely null and void, effective this exact second. Terrence opened his mouth to argue, but absolutely no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality crashing down on his head. You secured the original lease agreement by submitting falsified financial disclosures to the property management company. Grandma Ruby declared, making sure the entire church congregation heard every single syllable of his crimes. You claimed $50,000 of stolen family money as legitimate business revenue. You committed gross financial misrepresentation. My corporate real estate attorneys have already reviewed the fraudulent paperwork you filed. You are nothing but a cheap grifter playing dress-up with my granddaughter's blood money. Therefore, as your new landlord, I am exercising my absolute right to evict you for material breach of contract and criminal fraud. You and your fake luxury spa have exactly 24 hours to vacate my property. If a single piece of your equipment remains inside this building by tomorrow morning, I will have my contractors throw it directly into the dumpsters out back. The absolute finality of her words acted as a detonator. Valerie completely lost her mind. The perfectly crafted image of the devout, successful Christian mother shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her entire social circle. Valerie let out a blood-curdling, unhinged scream that tore through the quiet morning air. She kicked off her expensive designer heels, leaving them abandoned on the red carpet, and charged directly at her own mother. You senile old fool! Valerie shrieked, her arms flailing wildly as she lunged toward the DJ booth. You have lost your absolute mind. You are trying to destroy your own bloodline out of pure spite and jealousy. Desmond charged right behind her, his face purple with explosive rage, pushing past the velvet ropes. You cannot do this to us! Desmond bellowed, spittle flying from his mouth. We are your family. We built this empire. You are a crazy old woman who needs to be locked up in a psychiatric ward immediately. Before either of them could close the distance between themselves and the DJ booth, the 2 corporate attorneys sprang into action. They stepped smoothly in front of Grandma Ruby, forming an impenetrable human barricade of bespoke suits and legal authority. At the exact same time, the hired security guards, who finally realized who the actual property owner was, moved in quickly and grabbed Desmond by the shoulders, physically restraining him. Let me go, Desmond roared, thrashing aggressively against the strong guards. Valerie threw herself against the corporate attorneys, slapping at their tailored suits like a feral, desperate animal. I am your daughter! Valerie screamed, crying hysterically, her perfect makeup running down her face in thick black streaks. You are embarrassing me in front of my pastor. You are ruining my reputation in the church. You are a hateful, bitter old hag, and I will have you committed to a nursing home for this horrific disrespect." Grandma Ruby did not flinch or take a single step back. She watched her daughter throw a violently embarrassing tantrum with the cold, detached observation of a scientist studying a parasite. "You have no reputation left to ruin." "Valerie, Grandma," Ruby stated, speaking directly into the microphone, so her powerful voice overpowered the frantic screaming. "You built your social standing on the back of my brilliant, hardworking granddaughter. You used Nia as an ATM and threw her away the second she demanded basic human respect. You paraded around that church bragging about a business funded entirely by outright theft. You are a disgrace to the very concept of motherhood." The church elders who had cornered me just a few days prior to extort a $5,000 check out of my bank account were now actively fleeing the scene in absolute terror. They hurried down the sidewalk, covering their faces with their suit jackets and refusing to look back. Pastor Davis completely abandoned his flock power, walking toward his luxury vehicle without offering a single word of spiritual comfort to the screaming woman thrashing on the red carpet. The local influencers who had been paid to promote the grand opening were now gleefully live-streaming the entire meltdown to thousands of eager followers. The camera flashes fired relentlessly, capturing every second of my parents' total unmitigated humiliation. Keisha collapsed onto the red carpet, sinking to her knees in her white designer gown, right next to her mother's discarded shoes. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the illusion of her golden child status evaporated into thin air. "Stop recording us!" Keisha wailed desperately, waving a shaking hand at the influencers standing nearby. "Please stop looking at me." But nobody stopped. Her fake business was gone. Her stolen money was gone. Her public dignity was permanently obliterated. She was left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of her own toxic vanity and the public spectacle of her ruin. I watched the entire scene unfold from the sidelines, standing perfectly still in my tailored black suit. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of catharsis wash over my entire being. The heavy, suffocating burden of the black tax, the endless emotional manipulation, the relentless gaslighting, it was all finally dead and buried right here on the concrete. Every sleepless night I spent studying while they mocked me was finally vindicated. Every time I starved to afford medical textbooks while they flaunted designer labels was avenged. They had dug their own graves, and Grandma Ruby had just provided the massive, heavy headstone. I breathed in the warm morning air, feeling a deep, satisfying peace that I had never known before. Terrence, however, was not crying or begging for mercy. He stood frozen in the center of the chaotic red carpet, his chest heaving rapidly as the catastrophic reality of his situation set in completely. He had no business. He had no federal loan. He had a fake lifestyle built entirely on stolen cash, and now he was facing immediate eviction by a billionaire matriarch who held all the legal cards. His dark eyes darted frantically around the ruined red carpet, scanning the terrified faces of the remaining guests, before finally locking onto me, standing quietly by the velvet ropes. I stood there watching him with an expression of pure, icy satisfaction. The realization hit him like a runaway freight train. He recognized the absolute calm in my posture. He realized that I had orchestrated this entire sequence of events. "You set us up!" Terrence screamed. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles bulged against his skin. Terrence balled his hands into tight, heavy fists and let out a guttural, furious roar. He completely abandoned his crying wife, his ruined business, and his shattered public image. He lowered his head and lunged toward me. Swinging wildly. The security guards stepped swiftly in front of me, shoving Terrence backward. He stumbled back, hitting the floral wall. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I am going to destroy you," Nia, Terrence screamed. You think a lease termination stops me? I have federal backing. I will sue you for everything. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, smoothed a crease on my tailored blazer, and checked the silver watch on my wrist. I looked up, meeting his frantic gaze with eyes made of absolute ice. I would not worry about the lease, Terrence, I said, my voice projecting clear over the crowd. I would worry about the federal government. Terrence froze, his face contorting in confusion. What are you talking about? He demanded. I stepped forward, ensuring my parents and sister could hear their impending destruction. When you forced me to sign those loan documents at the sushi restaurant, I did not use my legal signature. I altered the fundamental geometry of the letters, changing my middle initial. Every document you submitted to the federal government bearing my name is legally void. I am not your guarantor. I am your whistleblower. Keisha stopped sobbing, staring at me in sheer horror. Terrence swallowed hard, his chest heaving. You signed them, Terrence stammered. The broker checked them. The broker checked for ink, not for forensic validity, I corrected smoothly. But the invalid signature is the least of your problems, Terrence. Do you remember bragging about how you washed my grandmother's $50,000 to create fake business revenue? Do you remember explicitly detailing your money laundering process to show off your financial genius? My purse was sitting right on the table, and the microphone on my phone was actively recording every single syllable. Valerie let out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest. Desmond staggered backward, his eyes wide with the realization that their golden ticket to wealth was actually a one-way ticket to federal prison. Terrence opened his mouth, but the words died in his throat. I sent the encrypted audio file of your confession directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the Small Business Administration Office of Inspector General. I stated, my tone devoid of mercy. I provided them with the routing numbers for the stolen funds and the timeline of your wire fraud. Lying on a federal loan application is a felony. Laundering stolen money is a felony. Right on cue, the wail of sirens pierced the downtown air. The sound amplified, bouncing off the glass and steel of the surrounding buildings. 3 heavy black tactical SUVs aggressively rounded the corner and swerved directly into the cordoned-off event space. They crushed the velvet ropes and parked at sharp angles, blocking any escape. The doors flew open simultaneously. A dozen agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS swarmed the red carpet. The local influencers scrambled backward, dropping their champagne glasses and lifting their phones high to capture the massive federal raid. Pastor Davis practically sprinted down the block, eager to distance his church from the fallout. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man, marched straight up to Terrence. Terrence Miller, the agent barked, flashing a gold badge. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and making false statements to a federal agency. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Terrence did not fight. The remaining arrogance drained from his body, leaving nothing but a trembling shell of a man. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed loudly across the pavement. Keisha dropped entirely to the floor, her pristine white designer gown soaking up the spilled champagne. She wailed hysterically, reaching out for her husband as the agents marched him past the cameras and shoved him into the back of a waiting SUV. Her fake empire had officially crumbled into dust. Valerie and Desmond rushed toward me, their faces pale and streaked with tears. The arrogance they had displayed for 28 years vanished completely, replaced by pathetic begging. Nia, please. Valerie sobbed, reaching out to grab my blazer. You have to stop this. Tell the agents it is a massive misunderstanding. Tell them you gave Terrence the money willingly. We gave you your life. You cannot let them take our family away. Desmond clasped his hands together, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. We will pay the money back. Nia. Desmond pleaded, his voice cracking. We will sell the catering business. We will do whatever it takes. Just tell the federal agents you made a mistake. Please do not do this to us today. I looked back at my parents. I looked at the 2 people who had stolen my future, gaslit My trauma threatened my medical license and paraded me around as a prop for their church friends. I searched my heart for even a single ounce of pity, a shred of daughterly guilt or hesitation. I found absolutely zero emotion. My heart was completely at peace. I gently but firmly swatted Valerie's right hand away from my blazer. "You told me I owed this family," I said, my voice carrying the unyielding calm of a woman who had finally reclaimed her soul. "Consider my debt paid in full." I turned my back on them, ignoring their frantic sobbing and the flashing cameras. I walked over to Grandma Ruby, who was standing tall and proud, her silver cane resting firmly on the pavement. She offered me a warm, genuine smile, wrapping her arm proudly through mine. We stepped over the crushed red velvet rope and walked toward her waiting town car. I was finally and completely free of my abusive and toxic family forever. I was ready to start my pediatric residency on my own terms, saving lives with my grandmother's $80,000 sitting securely in my personal checking bank account today, starting now.